John and Jane Hayes of Clonakilty, the founders of our family. Once upon a time, long, long ago, I decided to take a walk in the country. It was a warm summer morning, with dew still on the grass, and I took the road over the hill, still thinking about a story about old Mother Ireland, about how the old-timers believed that the soul of Ireland is an old woman, perhaps like this old lady in this picture. I hadn't gone far when who should I meet on the path than an old Irish storyteller, a Clonakilty, as they say. I nodded a timid hello, but he stops me and says,
"Top of the morning to ye. Say, what name be on ye?"
"Hayes. Hayes of Clonakilty."
"Saint be praised. Hayes, is it? Sure, and I knew them well."
"You did? You knew John and Jane Hayes of Clonakilty? This is my lucky day."
"'Tis the luck of the Irish, it is."
"Say, would you tell us a story?"
"I couldn't."
"Oh, come on. Why not?"
"You know it already."
"I never heard it."
"Ye haven't?"
"Never. Please. Please tell us about the old lady that's Ireland, and about how you knew the Hayeses."
"Well, it is this way. 'Tis an old tale brought down from ancient times about old woman Cailleach, old woman Ireland, Earth Mother who reigns over all, patron of healing, guardian of marriage, hearth and birth, the soul of Ireland, in whose hands rests the destiny of the nation. You know, this here old woman could stand for not only old Mother Ireland, but ye Irish mothers, guardians of home and hearth and family. Your Irish ancestors, foremothers and forefathers, those who came before ye, like Jane and John Hayes at Clonakilty, the founders of your family, and who are still looking out for ye."
"The founders of our family, and they came from Clonakilty. Were you ever in Clonakilty?"
"Clonakilty, heaven help us! One teapot in the town, and that without a spout."
"I don't believe a word of it. Every house in town has a teapot of its own, and some of them are mighty fine ones, too." "Oh, you're pulling my leg. Forget the teapots. What I want to know is who were this John and Jane. There are lots of different John and Jane Hayeses, and I can't make head nor tails of any of it. And can anything good be said about them?"
"Anything good? Why, the Hayes and Phipps families was decent hard-working folk. They lived right over yonder on Old Chapel Lane, honest as the day is long. Edward Phipps was a weaver, and John Hayes made shoes. Taught all his sons the same trade he did. And Jane Hayes, why, herself worked her fingers to the bone trying to get enough money to help son George."
"Help George? Why was that?"
"I heard tell George joined with the British Army when he was just a young spalpeen, 16 or so, and his mother didn't like it at all. Says he was far too young to be in the army, so herself worked and worked until she had enough money to buy him out, she did."
"Buy him out? How was that possible?"
"'Cause why, in them days you could buy out a term of enlistment for £10.
£10? £10 doesn't sound like much money to me.
"Och, not much money, ye say? Not much money. It'd take a loss of hard work to get £10.
"I don't understand. How come it took so long?"
"Begor work was scarcer than hen's teeth for men, let alone women, and any work had to be lasted less than half a year. A strong, strapping man only earned a few pennies a day. Women earned even less, so she was lucky to get any work at all. It'd take a long time to earn £10, it would."
"Oh, I see. What kind of work do you think she could do?"
"Oh, mayhap she knitted stockings, spun wool or flax, poiled turf in the peat bogs, peddled peat sods or blackthorn sticks. planted, weeded, dug lumpers, potatoes to you, stacked wheat and oats, or gathered in the hay, or herself could have kept chickens, a cow or a goat, sold butter and eggs on market days, walking barefoot for miles to get there. And you can be sure she drove a hard bargain, she did. Irish women are wonderful bargain drivers, and will argue for hours over split of a penny. A woman's tongue is so sharp she could shave a mouse asleep, she could.
Sure sounds like lots of hard work to me. How long would it have taken to get 10 pounds?
Mayhaps 2 or more years, working from dawn to dusk if herself could find work.
Amazing. So with Jane's help, George finally got out of the army. What else do you know about George?
Let's see. George finally married Fanny Phipps, the girl next door, because like I said, the Hayes and Phipps families were neighbours on the same street, on Chapel Lane, right over there. Took him long enough, it did. By then, Fanny was an old maid. She was 25 when he finally got around to it. Of course, himself was 25 too. They was married in the parish church, not far from here. Kilgariff Parish Church, Church of Ireland it was. They stayed here about a year or so after and had a little gaffer, little lad named Willem, I think.
Yes, William. I've heard about him. He later married a woman named Mary Ann Reiser.
Did he now? Oh, then they took off for England, they did, following George's old regiment. Being a shoemaker himself made boots for the soldiers in the regiment at the Tower of London, later in Canterbury.
About when do you think that was?
About 1848, seems to me. Yes, Willem was born in 1848, and they was in London by 1850.
What else do you know about John and Jane Hayes? Our John and Jane.
Seems to me they had a passel of young'uns, they did. Nothing unusual there. Besides George, there was Henry, Marianne, Martha, Jane, William, Edward, and John Joseph.
John Joseph, he was my grandpa. I've heard a lot about him.
The great-grandfather of ye, saints be praised.
Can you tell me anything else about John Joseph?
Well, himself was a clever young'un, he was. Loved learning and books. Went to the parish school as long as he could. Kept himself in school by memorising the most Bible verses ever. Along with the one who knew the most verses got to go to school free. Since the only textbook was the Bible, he learned lots of Bible, he did. They called him a walking Bible. Of course, he had to drop out of school because he had to learn a trade like we all did. Became a shoemaker like his daddy.
Oh, yes, I've heard about that. My mother told me stories about his winning prizes to be able to stay in school. Tell me about the time he almost died.
When John Joseph was just a broth of a boy, mayhaps 10-year-old, he came down with cholera. Mighty bad cholera it was too. People keeling over left and right in a few hours. Very dangerous. Howsomever, there was no place to take care of the sick and dead except at home, and so they was so afeard other people would get it, they buried him the very same day. Young Johnny was taken terrible sick, went into spasms, seemed like he was dead. They called in the priest, laid his body out on the table, tied his chin up, and strewed flowers over him as pearty as you please. And the chief mourner, his old grandmother, began weeping and wailing and keening for him, like the chief mourners are supposed to do.
So the mourners came, and then what happened?
Well, the old lady was especially attached to the bright-witted little fellow, and as he lay stiff and cold, she said, "Oh, I know my little Johnny won't leave me, he won't. I can't let him go." And she snatched up a kittle of hot water and poured it down his throat. So he started bawling and coughing and fighting for breath. The old lady nursed him back to life, she did. But he was thin as a whipping post after that.
Oh. Did you ever know John Joseph when he was older?
Folks around here say he allus was mad for religion. Allus looking for a new religion he was. Joined up with the Ranters, then the Methodists, and after he went to London, he joined the Mormons. Imagine that, the Mormons of all people, become a travelling preacher for the Mormons. Converted his brother George and his wife Fanny, and they all took off for America with them there Mormons.
Yeah, they did join the Mormons. What else can you tell me about the John and Jane Hayes family?
Well, I know they had their share of troubles, they did.
They had troubles? What kind of troubles?
Because why, another little feller in the family died too. Little lad also named Willem. But he really died, more's the pity. Terrible, terrible it was too, God bless him.
Oh, what happened to him?
Well, Willem was a young lad, just learning to be a shoemaker, an apprentice as we say. And he watches his daddy, who's an expert, how he puts the shoe tacks in his mouth and spits them out like this, just as fast as you please, and he tacks them into the shoe leather. Begorra, William gets a mouthful of shoe tacks just like his daddy and tries spitting them out fast too, but instead of going he swallers them. Swallers the whole mouthful of tacks he did.
Oh, how sad.
And of course the whole family lived through hard times. Pestilence, poverty, when all we had to eat was tatties with a bit of fish once in a while, and we was lucky if we got 2 meals a day. Then came the great hunger, the terrible famine. Of course, when the lumpers got the blight, we was all half starved, and thousands did starve, poor creatures. Begorra, me backbone was well acquainted with me belly, I can tell ye.
Terrible, terrible. I've read about the famine. Unbelievable.
You must know it was believable, it was. 1 million people died, and 1 million left the old sod and went off to America. It was either stay in Ireland and starve or leave everything behind and go to America. That's when George and Fanny and John Joseph went off to London to find work.
Do you know anything about George and John Joseph after they left Ireland?
I kind of lost track of him after that. Seems to me I heard John Joseph married an English Colin. Somebody named Rachel, I think.
Yes, I know about her. She was my great-grandma. Her name was Rachel Eleanor Wagstaff, and she was from Bedfordshire, England.
Janie Mac, the great-grandmother of ye. Seems you know more about him after that than I do. Maybe you'd better tell the rest of the story yourself.
Well, to make a long story short, after lots of adventures, John Joseph, Rachel Eleanor, and her mother, Mary Bathsheba Wagstaff, left for America. I think this might have been about 1853. John Joseph and Rachel were married on board ship. Now there's an interesting story. You see, the ship was overcrowded, and the captain knew they were going to be married in Utah, and he was trying to make more room for passengers. So he came to them and asked if they would be married on board ship. So they said they would, and were married just as the ship left Liverpool. The man who married him was Joseph W. Young, the elder in charge of the Mormon immigrants. When they got to the United States, they took a steamship up the Mississippi River to Keokuk, Iowa. Then they crossed the plains to Utah in a covered wagon and made a home in Pleasant Grove. They had 9 children, but only 5 of them lived. Both John Joseph and Rachel died in Pleasant Grove and are buried there. Oh, and something else I almost forgot. He was a wonderful storyteller, a shunny K like you. He wrote a story or poem for almost every occasion. You see, in those days, they didn't have the movies or radio or TV or CDs or stuff like that. And so they had to make their own fun. And it seems that every time they had any kind of a celebration, a church party or community celebration, he was asked to supply an original poem. He wrote lots of poems. Things like Patty and the Pork, St. Patrick and the Snake, 24th of July, and that was published in the newspaper. And he wrote many, many others too.
Sounds like he was for keeping all traditions alive, he was. And George and Fanny, what happened to them?
Well, you remember how George and Fanny followed the old regiment as he made boots for the soldiers, first to London, later to Canterbury. They had 6 kids, but only 5 of them lived to maturity. Remember that first little boy, little William, who was born in Clonakilty? Well, when he was a young man, maybe about 16 or 17, he went off to America by himself. He sailed on the ship Caroline. A few years later, 2 other children, a daughter, Frances Georgina, and a son, John Phipps Hayes, also went to America. Then later on, maybe about 1874, I think, George and Fanny and 2 other daughters, Matilda and Martha, also emigrated to Utah. But by then, ocean travel was by steamship instead of sailing ship. They crossed the Atlantic on the steamship Wyoming, which was faster than sailing ships. They didn't have to cross the plains in a covered wagon, but they were able to go by train. So all in all, the journey was much shorter and not as hard as by traveling by covered wagon. When they arrived in Utah, they made their homes in Pleasant Grove, Salt Lake, or Pleasant Green, now known as Magna, Utah. And those kids got married, and he had a bunch of kids too. 3 generations of Utah Hayes. George and Fanny are buried in Pleasant Grove in the same plot as John, Joseph, and Rachel.
I see. Say, is that there box one of those newfangled things that can make a picture? Begor, I'd sure like me picture took. You wouldn't happen to have any pictures of those other Hayes, would ye?
So happens I do. But first, let me show you our family tree so as you can get an idea of who belonged to whom. First of all, the roots of the tree stand for our John and Jane Hayes of Clonakilty, the parents of our immigrant ancestors. These 2 main branches of the tree represent the 2 brothers, George and John Joseph Hayes, who left Ireland, joined the Mormon Church, and came to Utah. On the left side of the tree is John Joseph and Rachel Eleanor Wagstaff with their children and grandchildren. The right side of the tree shows his brother, George Hayes, who married Frances Bibbs, and their children and grandchildren. Now, is that clear as mud to you? I hope it makes some sort of sense.
Begor, I think I got it.
Good. Now for some family pictures. And so our story ends. Following in his father's footsteps, a third generation of Irish storytellers, Henry Nephi Hayes, wrote the following. And like a good Irishman should, he left a blessing on our houses.
Now peace be with our numerous households ever, for all remaining many earthly days. Then tell Saint Peter at the pearly gates, our pass to heaven is this, the name of Hayes.